Hello, welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you've been here before. My name is Beth Ann, and today I want to talk about two books I've read recently that have really sort of opened my mind a lot in terms of how I think about my career and myself as a worker. And also, I think are just very helpful for life in general. So, the two books I'm going to talk about are How Women Rise, Break the 12 Habits Holding You Back from Your Next Raise, Promotion, or Job, and The Happiness Advantage, the seven principles of positive psychology that fuel success and performance at work. So, before I dive into the books, just a quick backstory about why I picked these up. So, if you've been on my channel for a while, you might remember I posted a video about a big career change that I did in the spring. So, I had been an academic for all of my adult working life, basically. And I was a professor. And then I decided to leave that job, and I now work for an environmental consulting firm. So, really big career shift. And as part of that career shift, I felt a little bit at sea. Um, because as an academic and as a professor, I knew what were the milestones. I knew what was the career growth. Like I knew what I needed to accomplish when. I sort of knew what I needed to be doing, and was doing it, and it was really fantastic. And then it became clear that my college couldn't support sort of a real growth in my career, and I wasn't ready to be done growing. But we're also geographically constrained because my daughter is in public school. So I didn't want to uproot everybody again to move to try to find another job at a different college or university. So I decided to change careers and try to find a job where I could still be a scientist and still sort of grow as an intellectual and as a practitioner within my field. So I did that, and it's great. But I'm now in a very different environment than I ever expected to be in. And so it's a real mind shift just thinking about what do I think is being a good employee? What do I think is doing a good job in this new context? What is my path forward? Because I don't necessarily want to just do the job that I have now. I would like to grow. That was one of the reasons why I left my old job. So, and I don't know what that looks like in my field or in my particular company. And I'm still very new. Haven't gone through an evaluation period yet. That's actually coming up very shortly here. So I'm going to get a lot more information from my company and from my peers as I get more into things. But when I don't know something, I go try to find it out. And I often turn to books. So that's where we got these books. And I got these actually as recommendations from a woman who's a little older than me, a little more established in a consulting firm, who had led a session at a conference that I attended about getting a job in consulting. It was geared a little bit more towards early career folks, but then she was also talking about how do you keep your job in consulting once you're there. And so I talked to her afterwards and just said I'd done a career change and I wanted to know more about sort of this new professional world and how do you advance. And so she gave me several book recommendations and podcast recommendations that she said really kind of changed her life. And I decided to check some of them out. So that's here we are. That's why we're here. So the first book I'm going to talk about is the How Women Rise book, because I found this book just absolutely incredibly fantastic. I got it out of the library. And then once I finished it, I immediately went on Thrift Books and bought my own copy. And it actually turns out it's signed by Sally Helgesen, one of the authors. So that was a nice little perk. The Happiness Advantage, I just finished a few days ago, and I found it really, really helpful. But it didn't sort of blow my mind in the way that How Women Rise did. So I'm not going to buy my own copy of this. I got it from the library, but it was still a really helpful book. So anyway, How Women Rise, the most incredible book that's career self-helpy sort of thing that I could ever imagine. So the thing that I really liked about this book is that there's actually very little that's prescriptive in it. A lot of it is just about let's identify patterns that women tend to have in sort of corporate workplaces. A lot of these habits, though, are also things that I think women exhibit in all areas of their lives, and so I think that it can be really helpful from that standpoint as well. So they identify 12 habits that might be keeping women from reaching their goals. Obviously, these are, steeped in the cultural history and expectations of the United States. So you have to understand sort of the habits are coming from that background, right? So, I just want to say what they are. So, habit one is reluctance to claim your achievements. That's obviously going to hold you back a bit. Habit two is expecting others to spontaneously notice and reward your contributions. So those two kind of go together, right? It's like speak up and own what you're doing and own what you're accomplishing. Habit three is overvaluing expertise. So the idea there is that you can get into a really tunnel vision mindset of wanting to really excel at the particular thing that you need to be doing now. So you can become sort of a real expert in the job that you're doing now. But that's not all that a career is, because that can prevent you from looking ahead to what's the next job that you want. Um, Habit four is building rather than leveraging relationships. So the idea is that women tend to invest a lot in their social circles, professionally and personally. And so if all you're doing is building those relationships, um, like you need to use them at some point. Like that's part of the point of relationships. So especially professional relationships, is you don't want to just build those relationships. You want to leverage them and use them to get yourself ahead. And of course, also go let other people leverage their relationship with you. Habit five is failing to enlist allies from day one. So that all of these sort of intertwine, right? So, like one example, failing to enlist allies from day one, you could be so tunnel vision with habit three, overvaluing expertise, that you dive into a new job and you just keep your head down and you just want to do the best job that you can at the specific tasks that are assigned to you. And then you pick your head up like a year later and you realize you don't like know anybody in your company. And so, how are you going to advance, say into a management role or something if you haven't like built those relationships and made those allies and sort of embedded yourself socially in the organization. Habit six, putting your job before your career. So again, sort of a tunnel vision on like, what are you doing now? What is your position now? And sort of losing track of the bigger picture and how to position yourself for the bigger picture. The perfection trap. So I think letting perfection be the enemy of completion. What is that famous quote? Or yeah, just getting stuck in the details. The disease to please, habit eight. That's one of those stereotypes about women in the workplace in particular, is just saying yes, saying yes, saying yes to like all the projects that come across your desk, being a real go-getter. For habit eight, the discussion in this book is about take a step back to think. Like, obviously, there's times in your career when you do want to say yes to every opportunity that comes your way, but you should also be critically evaluating those, because there's going to be stuff you'll get to points at different stages in your career where people are going to be asking you to do things that don't actually benefit you. They don't actually benefit your career. They don't even necessarily help the other person out that much. So just be on the lookout for things that you can say no to, basically. Habit nine is minimizing. And I forget how that was different. Minimizing. Yes. So they had a really physical example for this one. Sally, one of the authors, had noticed she was leading a workshop like in a small room, and there were a lot of people that were expected for this workshop. And so as people would continue to arrive, she noticed really different body language among the men and women who were already present in the room. So the women would sort of gather their things closer and they would scooch closer to each other, and they would actually like physically minimize their presence in the room to make room for new people coming in. Whereas the men just had no idea what was going on, and they just, kept occupying their space. So, she saw this very obvious visual signal. But so the idea is, obviously we want to be welcoming and inclusive, but you don't want to minimize the space that you're taking up in order to be welcoming and inclusive, at least in some context. So again, it's just like be aware of how you're behaving in a situation, and by doing certain things, are you actually minimizing your own presence or minimizing your own voice? Habit 10 was too much. I think that was the idea. I'm losing track of some of these later ones. What was too much? Oh, yeah. So this was the idea of the emotional too much, that in our culture, women are often told that they're too emotional. They're just too much to handle, like that sort of thing. But that's not a bad thing. Like being emotional, having emotions is not a bad thing. So this habit 10 was about sort of digging into that, thinking about how you show up emotionally in the workplace and basically figuring out a way to use what could be perceived in a male dominated workspace as like too much emotion or too much reaction or something. But like, how do you use that to propel yourself forward? How do you use that to propel like a situation forward? Because the flip side of that is that you're often a lot more tuned in to what's actually going on than someone who's not like actively feeling their emotions. So you can really kind of use it um, to uh, to be more analytical and sort of figure out what's going on and sort of drive things in the right direction. And then habit 11 is ruminating. So getting too stuck on things that didn't go well. And then having like that playback in your head of that stupid thing you did or that deadline you missed, and letting that hold you back, or distract you from moving forward. Because everybody makes mistakes. And one of the gendered things people notice is that men in the workplace are much more likely to just brush off a mistake that they made, whereas women will let it really like sit with them and eat at them. And then habit 12, letting your radar distract you. So going back to that idea of women tend to be sort of more emotionally and socially astute. And if you are paying too much attention to what's going on with the people around you, you can actually end up distracted from your own goals or from what's going on in the moment. One of the examples was like an executive or somebody who was trying to give a presentation, and got so distracted by the facial expressions of people in like the front row of the audience that they would actually like lose their train of thought in the presentation because they were too worried about like what were those people thinking and feeling in reaction to the talk. Um, so I don't want this video to get too long. I just realized it's really long. Anyway, so how women rise. So what I got out of this was I I felt that a lot of those habits were accurate and not necessarily that I could see myself in every single one. I could certainly see myself in a lot of them and in different times and different places, of course. And I could see other women that I know in these habits. I, of course, could see lots of men and non binary folks in these habits that I know. So it's definitely not women specific, but it is. Identifying sort of at like the cultural historical level, right? It's like we still lack women in the C-suite sort of level of leadership. And why does that happen? And so on an individual level, these habits might resonate with people as things where it's like, I do that. I could stop doing that, or I could learn to stop doing it sometimes, in order to achieve the goals that you might want. So I found that very helpful. I found it helpful enough, mind blowing enough, like I said, that I bought a copy so that I can just dip into it now and then. I feel like it would be super helpful just to be like, what were those habits again? Oh yeah, I'm still doing habit 4 and habit 6 or whatever. Maybe I can like snap out of that, work on those. So I really, really enjoyed this and found it super helpful for thinking about being in sort of a more corporate workplace and thinking about how to move forward. Okay, so I will touch briefly on the happiness advantage. This one didn't resonate with me quite as strongly. I think partly because it is a psychology book written by a psychologist. It's not academic at all. Like it's a very approachable book, but it has just sort of, I don't know, it has just a little bit more of that sort of psychology feeling. And then he's summarizing all of these psychology studies that the field and people like we learned very interesting things from these studies, but it's there's a lot about psychological studies that I don't like very much, even though I can see the need for them. So there's nothing like um unpleasant or like getting into the realm of like what is really an appropriate study to do or not. I mean, these are human behavior studies, right? So they're usually working with like college students or different populations, and they're just asking them questions, or they're saying, look at this silly picture before you answer these questions versus this other person who didn't get to look at the silly picture, right? So yeah, it's just there's just something about psychology books that I'm uh, doesn't super excite me. So there was sort of that tone to this book, which I think is what took it from. I mean, it's still like a 5-star book. Like it's excellent. It's very well researched. But again, it's that category of like I'm probably not going to buy this. And then the main point of this book is really just that um, people who are happier tend to succeed, which kind of stinks in some ways. Um, and the whole premise that he sets up in the introduction is that, especially in the field of psychology, the idea is that, if you have like this whole spectrum of human experience, and you take something like career success, right? And so psychology would tend to study who are the people that are sort of on the bottom, who are the people who aren't making money or who aren't succeeding in a career. And try to study those folks and see what is it about their lives or their training or something that leads to that outcome. So the field of positive psychology sort of flips it and says we've got most of the people in the world in this middle range, right? But then we also have we have outliers at the bottom that psychology tends to study. We have outliers at the top. And what positive psychology wants to understand is what is it about those positive outliers that sort of drives them up above the average. And the goal of this book is to try to identify some of the things those people have going on and figure out, are there any that people sort of more in the middle of the pile can adopt or adapt to try to push themselves up a little bit. So he makes very clear, and I had to keep reminding myself over and over, he makes very clear that this is not like a switch your mindset and your whole life's going to get better, right? Or like switch your mindset and you can cure depression, or switch your mindset and you can overcome trauma. This book is not that at all. This book is, let's study, especially from a career perspective. This is a book oriented at workers and careers. Those positive outlier people up at the top, what's like their attitude, their action, their motivation, and are there lessons there that can be maybe adopted by folks more in the average bin. So a lot of this is fairly straightforward. I feel like this book was written in 2010. And so a lot of his experience comes with working with groups of people in corporate environments that were really hit hard by the 2008 financial recession. And so studying in that sort of very tense environment, if you have a team that is sort of doing well in terms of like their morale and their work performance, like what is it about like those teams of people that maybe set them up for success so that they can be resilient in the face of hardship. So that sort of comes through a lot in his book. But as I was saying, a lot of these points are pretty common sense. But it's nice to have a framework where then you can look at your work life through it and think about like, okay, how do I apply this framework to make sure I'm actually doing these common sense things and doing them deliberately? Because if we just chalk it up to common sense, then you don't incorporate it as a practice, right? So I think that's where this book is helpful, is taking things that really just sort of make sense. And I think a lot of us probably know, and applying them in this really deliberate way. So he has 7 principles of positive psychology to fuel success at work. So I'm just going to go through these super quickly. So principle number 1 is just the happiness advantage. The idea that people who are happy and satisfied are going to be more productive and advance more. And again, we're just talking like sort of statistically, right? Principle number 2 is the fulcrum and the lever. So that was just sort of about how are you interpreting situations? Where are you sort of applying pressure? Principle number 3 is the Tetris effect. I forget what the Tetris effect was, even though I just finished this like 2 days ago. The Tetris effect was training your brain. So the idea is that, if you put people playing Tetris for like 36 hours straight, and that's like all they do, once they're done playing Tetris, they sort of see the world through that lens. They're like seeing shapes everywhere and like thinking about how they would fit together. So the idea with the Tetris effect is that you train your brain. And so you can do that socially. You can do it with, sort of goal setting and routine, like all kinds of ways, but you're sort of training your brain to make it expect to do the things that you want. One example he had was like getting up in the morning before work to exercise just like never happened. It was awful. And part of it was that the activation energy of like getting up and getting dressed in your gym clothes and picking your gym clothes, that all just made it not happen. And so he started just sleeping in his gym clothes, and he'd put his gym shoes right next to his bed. And so then it was just kind of like you fall out of bed and go to the gym, right? So you're kind of training your brain. And then he got to a point where he didn't need to do that because the habit was set. So yeah, it's about training your brain and setting habits. Principle number 4, falling up. So this is about when we fail, because we all fail. We miss deadlines or like whatever. The idea is not getting lost in that failure, but using it as sort of leverage to proceed and to move forward. So he was talking about how people who are super successful, those positive outliers, they fail too, just like the rest of us. But they're able to sort of turn it into like a positive outlook. Like, okay, I missed that deadline, but like, here's how I'm not going to miss the next one. Instead of really internalizing that failure. Principle number 5, the Zorro circle, is when there's a lot going on, things feel really crazy. Take a step back and define the tiniest area that you can control. Make sure you control that, and then you can make it a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. So one of his examples was a client who had a totally out of control email inbox coming after like 2 weeks of vacation, and he had 2,000 unread emails or something. And he just kept getting farther and farther behind because he just couldn't make himself dig into those 2,000 unread emails. And so the Zorro circle is from the movie Zorro, right? It's the idea that you can only be within one small circle in your sword practice. And when you master that, then you expand the circle and that sort of thing. So the idea was, okay, for this week, you're only going to address new emails, and you're going to address every single new email you get every single day. Like, okay, so the guy did that. All right, now you're going to spend 15 minutes going back through your old emails like every day for the next week, right? So just getting control over something small. And then once you have that control, you've built up your confidence, then you can expand your circle. Principle number 6 was the 20-second rule. And I already forgot what that one was as well. What was that one? Oh yeah, this was another sort of minimizing barriers to change one. It was about setting habits. I honestly don't remember the difference between the Tetris effect and the 20-second rule. But they were both about, both about setting habits. I don't remember exactly what the 20-second one was. Oh, that's that. Yeah, it was basically like there's often only 20 seconds sitting between us and something we really want to do. So the example for the author was he had played guitar when he was younger, and he really wanted to take it up again as an adult. The guitar sat in his closet right off his living room. He wanted to play guitar in the living room. He would set himself a goal, like for a month, I'm going to play guitar for like 10 minutes every day. And he couldn't do it. And what he ended up trying was, instead of leaving the guitar in the closet where he'd have to go get it out, which takes like 20 seconds, he left it in the middle of the living room on a guitar stand. And then he was able to do a month where he actually played it every day because it was right there. So again, like an activation energy thing, making something so easy that you can't help but do it. And then finally, social investment. And actually, I meant to talk about this with How Women Rise, but one of the things I love the most about both of these books was just talking about the importance of your social circle, professional and personal, for achieving your goals. And that even like our social circle is usually the first thing to fall off when we get busy. Like we think, oh, I can't go out to dinner, I can't go get drinks. But that should be the opposite, because it rejuvenates you so much that it's worth it to take those couple of hours to go hang out with your friends. Even if you think you're taking time away from work or something like that. Because you're going to come back to it actually able to focus and be productive and efficient with your time. And then also, if you're trying to improve a habit or something, make yourself socially accountable. Find a friend who also wants to improve a habit, and do a daily check-in or do a weekly check-in about how you're doing on your goals. So both of these books like really emphasize that social aspect, which I thought was really, really powerful. Because I think we all struggle with that. And they both are just like, to get ahead at work, you've got to have relationships, and not just work relationships, which is what you might think for getting ahead at work. But like, your friends are important. Your friends are supporting you getting ahead at work. They're supporting your mental health. Your family is really important. So don't neglect those things. And they should be your priority, even from a career perspective, because the peace and happiness that you get from those social interactions can really propel you forward in the workplace as well. So This is a way longer video than I normally do. Kudos to anyone who watches all of it. But I really enjoyed both of these books and found them very helpful for putting my new career into perspective, and my life into perspective. I would be really curious if any of you have other recommendations for books that might be sort of similar and give similar, just sort of like common sense observations of how people work and how that can impact us in the workplace. So I will end there. Thank you for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye.